Hello, welcome. Thank you everybody for joining us today. We have CJ Pierce here with us from ETC to talk about her journey in the theater here. So let's just start out talking about how you got into theater.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm CJ. I got into theater pretty early on in life. I had a lot of cousins who would participate in like community theater. They were homeschooled, so that was their like socializing time. And so I'd go see shows all the time. I was always really into scenery actually, and sets and like kind of building and creating worlds. So my dad was an art teacher, so I have a really strong background in visual art. So learning design and things like that, as far as building sets, painting, that kind of stuff, always really intrigued me. The first time I ever noticed lights, I was at a show and there was this random white light on the far side of the stage where there was no action. And I was like, why is that light on? And my dad was like, be quiet, they're over there. I was like, but why is that light on? And he was like, you're ruining the show. I was like, but why is that light on? And that probably should have been my first knowing that lighting was going to be where I'd end up ultimately. But basically, I went and saw shows all of my childhood, finally got involved directly with theater around like 8th grade, started doing like carpentry and things like that, scenic painting. Didn't really get into electrics until high school. So other than that, did a ton of carpentry. I actually like would even build things outside of theater with my dad. Like we'd build steps and things in the house. So was very like hands-on and practical stuff like that. Again, painting was a big thing. So scenic painting, all that kind of stuff, understanding color was the base of my theater beginnings. And then basically throughout high school, I was involved with the tech crew, all that stuff, got involved with lighting around sophomore year. Basically, I realized that with lights, you can change the place and like the location and feeling of a space without the audience really knowing what's happening. So originally, like I said, I was really into sets and like I thought I was going to be an architect. I would sit outside people's houses and draw them like a weirdo. They'd be like, why are you on my lawn? And I'm like, I'm just drawing your house. Like, so for me, looking at architectural structure and how to build things. And then once you get into theater, how to build things that fit in a space and need to move and things like that really interested me. But with lighting, you don't have to move anything necessarily. You can just shift the intensity or change the color or the angle, things like that. And for me, that was a much more kind of ethereal set design, like an atmospheric way of building a set. And a lot of times in professional settings, you don't necessarily have a ton of money to make every set exactly picture perfect the way it's supposed to. But with lights, you can really change the entire atmosphere, the entire feeling just by shifting color and things like that. So for me, that's what really got me into lighting, was knowing that I could have an effect on the audience without being so obvious about it. So yeah, in high school, I got interested in the lighting crew. If you guys read the introduction, I actually was told by my high school theater teacher that I would never make it in lighting. Mostly there was some drama with the other theater teacher, and I was dating the lead of the musical, and then I broke up with him, and then they got mad about it. And so they're like, you need to get out of our theater. Anyway, high school trauma, it's all past now. So actually that ended up working out really well for me though, because when he told me I wouldn't succeed, it kind of lit a fire in me to be like, now I have to, right? So I actually started working in community theater, which was an amazing way to kind of meet adults and other people who were really interested in theater outside of, they weren't getting paid to do it. They didn't have to be there. It was just a lot of people who really loved theater. So I started as an assistant stage manager, started doing lights and light designing things. And I got to play with like all sorts of old school dimmer boards where you have like the pencil that pushes up the different scenes, and then you like switch to the other one and use the pencil to pull everything down. And so I kind of got my first real look at how theater can be a community when I was in high school working in community theaters. The community theater I worked at actually brought in a lot of professionals to do, the directing and things like that. So it also kind of gave me a foothold into the local community of professionals. So I'm from Cleveland, probably should have said that a while ago, but Cleveland, Ohio. So this theater that I worked at, the people that I was working with worked for like the Cleveland Opera and things like that. So there were just all these professionals just coming in on their nights off to like help do whatever. And it was just really awesome to see that kind of commitment from people who weren't theater majors or didn't do, anything else with theater. This was just their passion that they did on the side. So because my high school theater teacher didn't want to encourage me to follow theater, I actually applied to college as an international business major. I took Chinese for 4 years. And so I was like, I know Chinese, that business, I don't know, that's where the world's going. But pretty much immediately was like, I am not going to enjoy this. And I'm going to have to go to school for 4 years for a thing that I'm like, I'm not a business person. I love the arts. So I ended up changing my major actually to art education. Like I said, my dad was an art teacher. I was like, I can be an art teacher. But when I got to college, I actually started working in the theater. And I'd have my studio classes, it was pretty much like going to art school, like studio classes, little side of education, then I'd be working in the theater. So I did that for a while. And this was in Dayton, which is Southern Ohio. So it was 4 hours from Cleveland. Didn't really know anyone in Dayton. And then ultimately, after my sophomore year of college, the art department was like, you're great, but you spend too much time in the theater. So you have to make a choice. Do you want to do art or do you want to do theater? And I was like, guess I'll do theater. Like basically my whole life, theater's just been pulling me back and pulling me back. So then I actually transferred in the middle of college to Cleveland State, which is partnered with Cleveland Playhouse, which is the oldest regional theater in America. So they're pretty awesome. And basically I got to go back to Cleveland, go back into that community where I already knew people. So the second I got back into Cleveland at 19, I was professionally light designing and stage managing and getting paid, not a lot, but getting paid to run things because I had 2 years of a really strong education and I had known these people for so many years already. They already knew who I was. It was really easy and awesome to come back into the community at that point. So then the next 2 years, finished my degree. I have a degree in technical theater with a focus in lighting design from Cleveland State. I actually got a couple AEA contracts as a stage manager, did some scenic painting. So again, just like I kind of went all over. I did some scenic fabrication for permanent installs, which is like so random. But I'm definitely not the theater tech who just like, I'm doing this one thing and this is the one thing I'm doing. I kind of branched into all sorts of different places in theater, very diverse background and all the different things. And basically after I graduated, I designed for a while in the Cleveland area, schools, theaters, community theaters. I worked at several high schools actually. High schools are one of my favorite places to design because they're just like everyone's so excited to be there. Also did a few colleges and then I got offered, well, a few colleges, including the Ohio State University. So I would actually travel from Cleveland down to Columbus. And then I was working with one of the people there when they actually offered me a job to run the Columbus Performing Arts Center. So that building was a proscenium theater, a black box, a dance studio, as well as offices and classrooms. And basically my job entailed scheduling all of the events, all of the shows coming in for community theaters, professional theaters. It's one of the only like communal theater spaces in Columbus. So basically, not only did I schedule all that stuff, I had to start up all the theaters, shut them down, know how everything worked, not just lighting, but sound, the scenery equipment, like everything, the flies. So it was a lot of responsibility and it was super cool. I got to design pretty much everything that came through there. So for 2 years, I was designing like 2 or 3 shows a month. It was insane. And then eventually, after going to USITT, which I'm not sure if Kirk talked about at all, but it's this theater festival for college students and things like that. I'd gone there a few times and every time I went there, like, you should apply for ETC. You should apply at ETC. Have you thought about applying for ETC? And finally I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. So I applied at ETC. And the second I got my interview, I actually quit my job in Columbus, even though I didn't have the job yet. And I drove to Wisconsin because I have a friend who worked here and I've not at ETC, but just worked in Madison. So yeah, and then I spent 2 weeks waiting to hear back if I got the job And I did, and that was over 2 years ago. So that's kind of my whole education into professionalism into where I am today.
Nice.
So
Cool.
yeah.
So going back a little bit, like you mentioned some of those first shows you saw were like through your cousins and stuff. Like,
hmm
so were those like community theater shows or were they through like school stuff?
Some of them were school, some of them were community, and then a few of them were, some of my cousins got into like professional
Oh, nice.
um or like semi-professional. Like it was like a level above community, but not quite like paid.
Nice.
But they're in Toledo. So it was like, it was really cool to see them basically travel around Ohio seeing like all of these cool
Oh, nice.
shows. But I actually went to inner city Cleveland schools growing up, and they have like a yearly, all Cleveland schools come together and make a show.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so and it's all the high schools, and since my dad was an art teacher, he actually got to help with like the sets and things. And as an adult, I actually got to like help do some of the hanging and things like it was just really cool to know that Cleveland as a community would come together and do theater for their students. So I saw oh man, what's that musical? Some Enchanted Evening. It's you know what musical I'm talking about?
Enchanted Evening.
Some Enchanted Evening.
I don't,
Oh,
but
South.
somebody in the chat might know.
Does anyone know? I guess I could just Google it real fast. But yeah, that show, I mean, I couldn't stop singing it. It's from South Pacific. So
Oh,
I saw South Pacific with all of these inner city Cleveland students, and it was just, it blew me away. And they also did West Side Story. And basically, these kids came from, you know, not the nicest suburbs or anything like this, was really inner city. And they got to have this kind of experience outside of their world and outside of themselves where they could come into the show and like act in front of all of these people in these giant professional theaters. And Cleveland Playhouse is actually who helped run some of that stuff. So as a kid growing up, I was like, oh, Cleveland Playhouse, they're awesome. And also like recognize that theater can be an escape for people to kind of like, you know, do things outside of themselves.
nice. And you mentioned that show with the light, that the like light that was kind of like
hmm
out of place or whatever. Do you remember what that show was?
Fiddler on the Roof.
Fiddler on the Roof.
They
Nice.
were doing the weird dream sequence where he's having like the nightmare or something, right?
Uh-huh.
And there's like the big ghost, and there was this bright white light, stage right, just like on, and it would like flicker on and off on their proscenium. And they're over here doing this crazy dream sequence, and I'm like, is that part of it? And then I was like, I don't think that's part of it. I think, I'm like, what's going on? Why is that light on? Like it just like, yeah, it was pretty
That's
bad.
cool. Sounds like you really got to see a lot of like wide variety of stuff growing up in your community and like fairly close
hmm
to home. That's great.
Yeah, I actually so I went to Cleveland School of the Arts for a year to study visual arts. It's like a mini version of what happened in college. So I was studying visual arts. The drawing teacher was like, "Oh yeah, you're so great at drawing, blah blah blah." I'm like, "Okay, cool." But then I saw posters for the show Antigone, and I was like, "Antigone, what is that? I want to see that." The show was Antigone, which I learned when I went to see it. I was so embarrassed. Um, but again, it was a black box. There was no set. It was all lights and just like furniture. And these kids acting and just like you were completely transported by the acting and the lights, just like the way, you know, the house drops down and suddenly you're not yourself. You're in this community, right? Um, so I went to my art teacher and was like, hey, I want to change my major to drama actually. And she was like, no. And I said, okay, bye. So I left the art school because I was like, yeah, I want to do theater. So yeah, it's a recurring theme in my life,
Nice.
theater versus visual arts.
Um, so I guess I wasn't aware that Cleveland had like an arts school. So it could, I think that's probably something a little different than like most of what people are doing here. So is that like you get a element of school choice in like when you choose a high school in Cleveland? So you were able to like pick that, or did you kind of fall into it, or how'd that happen?
So Cleveland School of the Arts is literally, it's a 6th through 12th grade program. I think it's changed since I went there. But basically you'd have a major, something you'd major in. So you'd have your regular classes, and then you would have a curriculum of focus on art classes. So like you'd have like drawing and ceramics one quarter, and then the next quarter you'd have something else like 2D design and printmaking. So basically it's a rigorous arts program. There's about, I want to say there was like 800 kids in the school when I went there. But basically it's just a huge school of arts kids and different majors. There's music, there's theater, there's art. When I was actually in 5th grade, my dad was like, "Do you want to audition for this art school?" And he was an art teacher. So I was like, "Yeah, of course, let's do it." And yeah, I didn't realize theater was an option because like, I'd always really admired theater, but I kind of always felt like I was like, "Oh, I can't do this. This isn't for me, not yet." Um, but yeah, Antigone, man, that really, it blew me away.
Nice. Cool. So yeah, I think we covered most of your like education career path there, but so why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now?
Sure. So I work for ATC. If any of you were here last week, I work in the same department Kirk does. Basically answer phone calls and emails all day about all sorts of problems. We work with everyone from like, like churches and schools to like Disney and New York and Broadway and Universal parks and like things like that. So basically, I have to know a lot about all of the different aspects of lighting and theater infrastructure and things like that, both entertainment and architectural. We also are kind of moving into the movie industry, so knowing how that stuff works. It's a lot of programming and networking stuff, which I'm sure we'll get into later. But yeah, so basically I just have to know a lot of stuff, know where to find information, and help people logically think through their problems to kind of solve or get them to where they want to be with the equipment that they have.
Nice.
So
Um, I know you guys all have to know a lot about everything. Do you have like a certain kind of specialty or area of expertise?
yeah, so I actually do power controls. So electricity in general. I was a master electrician in Cleveland for a while, and so it wasn't anything too difficult to figure out. It's definitely bigger scale when
Hmm.
we're talking about like whole theme parks or things like that. But mostly just how power works, how power gets through. And I mean that's like a big part of any sort of knowledge of any of our systems, right? Is just understanding power and data flow and, you know, is it plugged in? That's a lot of my job. So
Question one, like, did you unplug it and plug it back in? And like,
is it plugged in the first place?
yeah.
Is it, if it's not on, is there power? And
Mhm.
then did you try turning it off and back on again?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of what we do.
Nice. Um, and then you want to talk about some of the design work that you're doing now and like your
Sure.
design process?
Yeah, so I have done a couple designs here in town over at Broome Street Theater. It's over on the east side. But ultimately, like I said before, design for me is creating an environment without necessarily having the most detailed and dis- descriptive sets. Broome Street itself is a little black box theater. Um, both shows I designed there did not, they were pretty absurd and they were in a lot of places and there were a lot of changes. And basically, when you have theater that's moving that quickly, you can't always have such a solid set. So a lot of what I got to do was make the space with lights. So, pulling focus into the corner where the action is, or adding texture on the floor if they're in the woods and things like that. So do you want me to like super go into my process? It's like what it's
Yeah.
really, really
Yeah, I
like?
think that'd be great.
Awesome. Okay, so the first thing I do when I design a show is I read the script. The first time I read the script, I read it just to kind of get an idea of what's it about, what are the themes, things like that. Like just read it for fun, but like keep an eye out. The second time I read it for lighting, which is different. When you're just reading a story, you're getting kind of the themes and knowledge of who the characters are, where they're going. But when you read for lighting, you're looking for moments and also movement. So in the script, it might say, they're up here, they come down here, or they're in this setting and then they move to here, or this scene ends. So when this scene ends, is that the end of the lighting, or does it just blend into the next scene? They're in the same place, right? So for me, reading the script the second time is looking at timing and movement and things like that. So end of scenes, like there's very obvious places where you can think to like put a cue to like end things or move things or a lot of the two shows I worked on are again absurd, but one of them had a lot of magic. So I was actually able to create, like, I had to think of like effects and things to kind of show that magic was happening. And again, a lot of it has to do with timing, and I was using a lot of color, so like LEDs, to kind of change mood or give different feelings to different scenes depending on where we were, things like that. Because again, we didn't really have a set. So in particular, there is this one part where the daughter of this evil wizard is blasting him with her own power that she just found out she has. So I was able to create a cue that when she put her hands out, it actually shot light across the top light, which made it look like there was a beam shooting out of her hands across to where her father was. And then he like shot backwards once the light hit him. And it took a really long time to get the timing exactly right with the sound effect, but oh, that was like a chilling moment. Like it's so good. So you read the script a second time, you start thinking about, effects, things you can add with light. The next step is obviously you work on a team, right? So you have your set designer, costume designer, sound designer. For these shows in particular, the sound and lights were really important because they were basically the scenery. It's just a black box, curtains, lights, and sound. So how can we create environments with just those two elements? So basically, the sound designer gave me some files, listened to it, and I kind of got an idea for what the director was thinking as far as elements of the show and how they wanted things to be, and like, is this silly moment or is this serious? Like, how do we want the audience to feel? Should they be laughing at that or should they not be laughing? Like, what is your intention with these lines? Because the show I actually just designed, the director was also the writer, so he had written the show. So it was he had a lot of input about kind of how he wanted things to be and things like that. So working with all those people, we kind of, we went with this fairy tale thing. We made it very absurd. It was going to be very broad, very colorful, and just kind of like, just a lot. It was going to be very extra, very theatrical, like very obviously, this is not real. Breaking the fourth wall. I mean, the narrator like talked to the audience. So the whole point of it was to be kind of spectacular. And so that meant I was like, okay, spectacle, color. We're gonna have so much color. We're gonna have texture. We're gonna have chases and things like that. There was actually a boxing ring moment between two characters. They were like opposite on the stage. So we had like a white light on either of them with like a backlight that was a different color to kind of give them depth. And then again, I wrote an effect and it actually looked like there was like a light going around and doing the like ballyhoo that you do with lights, but it was just LEDs lighting up in a pattern and like chasing each other. And it was like the stuff I got to do for this show was so fun. And I will say that my favorite kind of design is absurd. And doing shows, like, I don't need sets. I love, which is crazy because I started and I was like, oh, I can't wait to like paint things and build walls. Give me no walls and I will make whatever you need, is how I feel about design. But I do like sets. I do like lighting up sets. Actually, one of my favorite shows I did was working with a director from Deaf West in LA. And I called it Practical Land. And basically the set was set in a like a thrift, not like a thrift store, like a pawn shop. And I want to say like almost 30 practical lights.
Wow.
So practicals are like real lamps on stage. And when nothing else was on and it was just the practicals, it almost looked like a starscape, like a night sky across the stage. And it was just, yeah. So I love lighting.
Nice.
And designing, and I like evoking feeling without having to be obvious about it. So
Nice. So on that note, like when you're designing for the most part, are you programming and like doing all your own board work as well, or do you have like are you working with a board op at all?
So before this last show, I would do all my own programming. Especially when I was in Columbus, we actually only had an Express console. So it was a lot of me just making submasters, doing things, recording cues. And then I had to know how to put enough work into the programming that the stage manager didn't need to know anything about it. They just had to press go. And that's a lot of my design has been like that. This last show I just did, the really like fun one with all the fairy tale stuff, I actually did have a board op, which was an interesting experience, because you have to kind of be able to communicate properly what you want and then have someone else make it for you.
Mhm.
So thankfully, with my time at ETC, I've gotten a lot better at describing the syntax I need to get the effect that I want. Because previously it'd be like, I want the lights to do the loopy thing, where they just one after the other. What is it? But like I was able to be like, oh yeah, make, sub 1 through 1 do this. And it was really cool to have the knowledge of how to talk to a board op,
Mhm.
and also have someone that got to push all the buttons so I didn't have to do it. It's a little nerve wracking because you're like giving your control to someone else and being like, okay, do this again, but like take it down 10%. And like you kind of feel like a jerk because you're like, no, okay, back up 5. Okay,
Right.
back down 2. And like getting so specific
It does
is
allow you a lot
difficult.
of freedom to like move around and like see everything from another angle though, and I think it can
Oh,
be a
absolutely.
very advantageous. um
Well, and especially for the effects and things, like being able to very quickly see if that effect was reading from like different parts of the stage. It was incredible. And like my board op was great, and it was just he's another tech support person. He's actually the other EO specialist besides Sasha. So he was like, "Can I program for you?" And I was like, "Sure." But
Nice.
again, the programming was done in a way that the stage manager did not need to do anything except hit that go button.
Mhm.
Because I think a big portion of being a lighting designer is letting the stage manager or the board up like do their job.
Mhm.
So they don't, sorry, that was my cat. So they don't need to worry about hitting go or the timing or the fades and things like that should all be on you.
Mhm.
Especially if you want specific timing and things like that. It should be considered before before handing the show off to someone.
Nice. um it's kind of along those same lines. I think like for some of the young designers in here, I think one of the hardest things to really kind of figure out, we're always in a time crunch when we're trying to get a design up and running, right? And especially, we usually have a pretty limited time frame, especially once we get actors in there. And so um, going from your concept to the actualization, and that pressure to get like to make something happen, like getting something up and going, and between like having the time to really um, to tweak your design, to do um, more of the artistic part of it versus the like just make sure that like there is light on stage and we can see what's going on. And I'm just kind of wondering if you could talk a little bit about that process of like from the very basics, like when you're running through a script and like getting your locations met, to then like taking it to that next level, and like how you think about like kind of polishing a look versus like just having light on stage.
Sure. Um, so without meaning to, I skipped a few steps in my process. So obviously you have to like make a plot, right? You have to plan where your lights are going to be around the set or not. And then you know, that's kind of what's going to help you determine the big picture. So when I design, what's easiest for me is to kind of know that I have, a wash from this side, a wash from this side, a wash from the front, top light, this, like, know the different components you have that you can use within your space. So that way it's almost like painting where you're putting a lot, you can put a lot of stuff on there, but then with light, you can very easily take it down or change the color and kind of move that way. So for me, what I would do a lot of times is have submasters that, you know, include all of my side light. Or, if I know that there's going to be action in these 4 spots, I have things focused there and know like, all right, this is A, B, C, and D. So that was what really helped my programmers. I call out like, sides on C, 50%, and they would know like, okay, we're in this quadrant, this is what we need. Um, so in that aspect, kind of making sure your bases are covered. I did a lot of theater for students in schools, and a lot of times they're like, brighten it up, brighten it up. We just want to see the kids' faces. Which again is why I really enjoy absurd dark stuff because I like playing with shadow as much as light. But knowing that you have all your angles covered for the actors and the space you're supposed to be covering. From there is where you get to add on the layers of color, texture, things like that. So the basics are going to be, do you have side light? Do you have front light? Do you have backlight if you need it? Do you have top light? You know, and what are the functions of those pieces? So I don't know if you guys have gotten into canvas theory or any sort of light design theory and things like that.
Not
Um,
not really, not as a group.
so basically it's just like the way color and light temperatures interact basically to make someone light up. And if you've seen any sort of textbook on lighting, they'll often have like, if I hold my light here versus here versus here, you know, like what are the different things this emotes based on where the light is. So just knowing, you know, you just knowing what angles you have to work at to get kind of the people on stage lit the way the director wants. You know, if you're going to have spooky, scary skeletons, maybe having footlight so they're all coming up and their shadows are projected on the back dancing. You know, if it's a bright musical, you're going to want a lot of front light and poppy colors on the sides and, you know, something bouncing them off the set. I did a design for Waiting for Godot, and the whole set was just black and white. And which is challenging as a designer because that means any color choice you make is going to be seen, but it also allows you to tell a lot of the story with color, right? So ultimately, like you want to make sure the person is lit how you need them from whatever angle you need them. And then from there, you can get into like, okay, what color is going to look best with the costumes, or what color is going to, you know, really show this emotion. With LEDs, it's awesome because you can be, you don't have to do anything. You can be like, oh, pick this color on the board, bam, now the whole scene is blue, you know. But kind of understanding that color theory and color temperature, especially having a background in art, like understanding really the way that color can make people feel, you know. If you ask someone like, oh, what's a color that makes people think of like happiness and sunshine and things like that, versus like if you were somewhere really dingy and gross and dark, like what color is that?
Mhm.
Um, so that's kind of like the next step of the process. And I also tend to, when I go into shows, I like over prepare like crazy. So like I read the show, I already have my cues like mostly numbered.
Mhm.
And then I have, you know, the lights programmed in a way that I can easily recall where certain lights light up other parts of the stage, right? Have it sectioned out and things like that. And then from there, it's kind of like you have your building blocks. So you, once you have all of that already there, when you get into the space, if the director's like, can we just get lights up? You have a submaster. Oh yeah, there's
Mhm.
some lights. You know, if um, you want this to be creepier or different colored, you know, have those submasters and things ready. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think for me, I do a lot of prep, um, which is always, you know, it's best to go in more prepared than under. I think one of the reasons I've gotten a lot of the design gigs I have is because directors are always surprised that I kind of come and I'm already done with my stuff. And I'm like, yeah, like if you have input and you want to change this or this, like that's fine, but like here's the show. I wrote all the cues. Like it's already, we just timing. Like a lot of stuff, the last thing I usually work on is timing. You know, because that has to deal with the actors and scene changes and things like that. Like I said, with that one show, the sound designer gave me the show or the files early. That way I could, you know, work with that sound in my design. Because for me, like timing is everything. I know Kirk touched on this a little bit last week, but you know, the difference between a 3-second fade and a 0 is very drastic. I did a show and the last moment of the show was actually, it was Corpus Christi, which is slightly religious, but not really. And it ends with like Jesus on the cross. And we had someone singing something. And like the last moment, he had like this red and like, you know, he had just died. But the song was 18 seconds. So all the board op had to do was hit go. And it actually like the lights all came down and just backlit him. So there was this huge shadow. And then it like came up and then went down like right at the last second. And that timing, if it wasn't exactly perfect,
Mhm.
can just change the show. You know, if you hear like an explosion and the lights come like too soon or too late, you know, that's going to kind of change the atmosphere for everyone. So I'd say have your building blocks, know where your lights are, know what they're hitting, know how you want things lit, this is the long list. So I hope no one's trying to write this down. But work, like, make sure you give yourself enough tools. It's seriously, like, I think of it like painting. Do you have your canvas? Do you have your paintbrushes? Do you have the different paint colors you need to make the portrait that you want to make? And again, obviously you take into consideration what the director wants and things like that. And, it's always very collaborative, but kind of to set yourself up to be as successful as possible, give yourself as many tools as you can.
So when you say that you're coming in with like the show a high percentage complete, are you doing like some pre-programming offline ahead of time, or are you like on the script and you're getting into the space and like doing your programming on site?
It depends on if I've been in the space before or not. So, for example, when I was in Columbus, I lived in that theater. So I knew it inside out, like had no issue having a show pre-made. If I've never been in a space, so the first show I did at Broome Street, I had to be in the space before I could really start writing cues. But then what I did was I just showed up before tech and sat in the theater with my script and with my lights hung and just was like, okay, do this, do this, do this. Like, these are the looks I want. And then that way, when the director came in, I could be like, this is what I have so far.
Nice.
And I know that's not always going to be the way you guys are going to have it. But if you at least have, submasters, right? Or you have your different color schemes, or, the easiest thing I can think of is, if you have, especially a show that's like scene 1, 2, 3, 4, all different spaces, and you kind of almost like using tracking, that you're always going to want this front light on at some level. So you build that in your cues. You're going to want the psych on at some amount. You don't know what color yet, maybe, but just having those blocks in there so you already have an idea of where you're going. And then if the director's like, no, I need that psych blue, because the psych always has to be blue, you can do that quickly and update, but for me, having those cues already in the script, knowing where I want changes, and having a placeholder in the programming for me makes things go so much faster.
Yeah. I think that's like really important, especially for people that are getting started, to like make sure that you have something there, to begin with. Like, I think some people can get too hung up on trying to like really finish one cue, that they aren't, get stuck on Q3 and then you're missing 4 through 7 or whatever it is. Whereas if you like really power through it, get like your framework there, and then come back to it, at least for me, like walking away from something and coming back to it always helps. Just kind of like keep your mind running with it. So I think that's a very important step.
Yeah, I mean, just having something is better than having nothing. If you're going to have 50 cues, record cue 1 through 50, and you have 50 cues sitting there, and just go through them. The other thing is, in the age of technology, I like to take notes, like hand write down notes. So, cue number or page number, and then write down what I need to go back on. Because tech rehearsal, well, depending on how the director is, some directors don't, tech rehearsal isn't for you for whatever reason. It should be, but it's not. It's about the actor, right? So one of the first shows I designed in town, the actors didn't know any of their lines, which is hard because my lighting cues were based on their lines. So because I already had things ready to go, except for that night when the show file got split, he could just work with the actors, and I could just sit there. And it was at least he had something to work with. But yeah, just making sure like kind of you have your stuff good is really, really important. Again, I feel like part of the reason I get along so well with directors is because I'm like, I'm not here to stress you out. What do you want? How can I help you? You want some lights on? Okay. And again, having something, you can always go back and change it. As long as you have the basics, as long as it's lit, as long as it has some context, some color, something, like anything is better than just being like, oh, I forgot to write cues 3 through 50. So, like just get them in there and then fill it out and come back later. Again, if any of you have any background in drawing, it's like you lay it out and then you get into it, and you can work on it and work on it and work on it to death, but there's still a painting there, rather than just having a blank stage.
Nice. So what type of advice do you have for people that are kind of following in this similar career path? Like, what are some things that you're like really happy you did, some things that maybe you'd avoid if you were doing it all over? Like, just kind of.
Sure. So I would say that one of the best things I did was diversify. So like I said, my skills aren't limited just to lighting. And I think that helped me a lot, especially in the beginning, to kind of feel out what I actually really enjoyed. Like what are things in theater that I really like to do? Because honestly, like I love stage managing a lot. Like it's a lot of fun too. Um, Sound design freaks me out. Um, the thing I hate the most is costuming. I do not like needles. I can run a saw all day, but you put a needle in front of me and I'm freaking out. So but because I've had all that experience, it not only allows me to know what I'm good at and what I can be passionate about, it gives me respect for other people. Like I hate costumes, but I am so like I'm like costume designer, you do what you want. Like
Mhm.
damn, like I can't sew that dress. So like good on you. Same thing like actors. Like I've been on stage a few times, but it's really like, you know, their job isn't to know what I do.
Mhm.
And my job isn't to tell them what to do. My job is to make them look good, you know. And so I'd say, make sure try things before you decide I'm absolutely going to do lighting, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do scenic building and things. Try everything. I went to Cleveland State my last 2 years and we had to take a class in each kind of like focus. So costuming, sound, directing, all of that stuff. And it really gives you a better understanding of the team you're going to have to work on because theater is a team sport. It is not about you. Um, Most of the time it's about the director, but a lot of the time, like it is not about you. You are there to make art and make it beautiful, but it's a team project. So having respect for the people around you and kind of having a basic knowledge of how things work. Um, and then as far as, I don't know, if there are things I would do differently, I think I was very fortunate that when I went to Dayton, I got a lot of education, like hardcore education. Whereas when I went to Cleveland, I got a lot of hardcore experience. And I probably didn't know nearly as much as I should have when I stepped into those roles,
Mhm.
but it got me where I am today. Um, so I guess don't be afraid to try things. I would definitely not be where I am if I didn't have that mix of base knowledge and experience. So get out there and do things. I'm glad that I I used to have like 6 jobs at a time. I'd be like stage managing, like designing, working at a bar, working at Starbucks, and just like wouldn't sleep.
Mhm.
And while it probably was not good for me, man, did I learn a lot.
Yeah.
And I'd recommend, take better care of yourself. Don't get burned out. Know your boundaries. I would say designing 3 shows a month for 2 years, definitely, like I couldn't step foot in a theater the first year I was in Madison because I was so like over theatered. Um, and so, just knowing your limits, knowing when to say no to an opportunity. Um, when I was offered that Columbus job, I actually had design positions lined up for the next 6 months that I then had to call those people and say, hey, I'm so sorry. And
Mhm.
honestly, it was terrifying and they were all so happy for me. So, the other thing is don't burn bridges. You never know. It's a very small world. I've worked with a lot of amazing people, and kind of like the reason I'm where I'm at today is because I just was in the right place, right time, worked hard. Um, you know, my brother works in film in New York, and he always says like you're only as good as your last job.
Mhm.
So do good every time, or do your best at least. Never give people a reason not to hire you again. Um, yeah, I would say step out of your comfort zone. I don't know.
Oh, that's
Except
perfect.
for needles, I'm not gonna. I can't. Sewing machines freak me out. Like I can do drill presses all day, but a sewing needle, ugh.
I've said the same, but during all this last few months, I've been like teaching myself to sew. So it's been kind of fun. Like I was not something I ever thought I'd get into at all, but it's been uh, a whole different side of things to have some sort of concept of how to do it is kind of fun, but it's definitely different, like very micro compared to like the big picture stuff that I'm more accustomed to, for sure.
Well, hand stitching is fine. If I have a needle in my hand, but the second you have the needle going up and down, I'm like,
Right.
no, I'm good. I'm good.
Nice. So that kind of brings us to our last question here. So like, how do you see the industry changing, like both kind of COVID and just in general? You know, we've talked about like how projections kind of making its way into film a little bit. We've talked about kind of like where the film industry and the theater industry are starting to share more technology again. And just wondering if you have anything you'd like to kind of add or touch on that.
Yeah. So I think a big thing that affects theater that I wish didn't is the economy. And I think a lot of people are looking at how to do theater on a budget. So I know at least for the company I worked with in Columbus, we did a lot of projection as scenery. So having the knowledge of, so I did projection design for a show. So knowing how to use projection software, how to make photos, do things like this is stuff I never thought I would know how to do. Even on the lighting side, you know, like everything is network. It's going away from hardline DMX and things like that. Understanding different protocols that different places use. I again, networking, like that is where we are going. A lot of what people have been calling us about recently in COVID times is how do I do this remotely? How do I remotely trigger my console? How do I, you know, set this up so I can walk away and the talent can come in and it just happens, you know, like learning really the ins and outs of technology and programming and how that stuff works is really, really important right now, I'd say. Yeah, I mean, the whole like film and theater sharing stuff again. I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of theatrical influence in film. You know, we're like we have Hamilton and things like that. You know, and I think that it's a good time to kind of study both, and not just put yourself in a bucket of like, oh, I only do theater, I only do film. I think previously there was very much a like, oh, I am one way or the other. But my favorite class I took in college was script analysis, where you read the script and then watched the movie and determined how the theater, like the script theater versus the actual movie, like how they were different and how that, you know, how those things coordinate and things like that. And I think that's where a lot of things are going, is having recording shows and things like that. So learning not just about your industry, but about sister industries and things like that. Also, I would like to say that I did finally get to incorporate art and lighting together for Old Brick Gardens this year when they were doing, when they were going to have their big festival of lights thing. It got canceled, but I was so darn close. I had painting and lighting all in one. So, you know, don't feel like because you have two different interests that they can't come together somehow. I think the future is going to be a lot of people having multiple skills, not just being, you know, you don't have to be a jack of all trades, but again, diversify your skill set. Make sure that, you know, if they can't use you for this, they can use you for something else. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is going towards being more green. So LEDs, understanding LED theory, moving lights are becoming more affordable. So how do moving lights operate? When I was in high school, I hated moving lights. The thought of programming one in college made me want to puke. And now I'm like, I'm going to design a moving light. Like I want to do this with my life. So, you know, not being afraid of things, but definitely like the theater and the world itself is moving towards big changes, I think. I feel like we've kind of been stuck for a while. And I have a feeling that in the next few years, given how many changes have had to happen, you know, economically and things like that, there's just going to have to be drastic changes. I know, especially like unpaid internships and things are kind of getting pushed aside, which I think is great. You know, it's hard enough to be, you know, a starving artist, and getting actual money for your work is great. So yeah, I mean, I think the arts are getting valued a lot more now that people are kind of realizing that when there's nothing left in the world, there are the arts. There's, you know, lighting and there's film and things. You know, I have a lot of friends who are stagehands that, you know, they're really into theater, but their stagehand gigs include setting up the presidential debates, setting up concerts, doing things like that, you know. Just because you have a passion doesn't mean you can't get interested or work on other industries and things like that. So yeah, I think the future is going to be a lot more blurry lines between industries and things like that. I know, especially like I was saying, like the unions when they do sets or anything like that, they don't get to pick like, oh, I'm only going to load in the Broadway series. Like, no, buddy, you're also loading in Britney Spears. Like, have fun with that on your Friday night. Yeah, I think the future is going to be diverse, and I think it's going to be pretty cool. I'm excited. I think there's going to be some big, awesome changes coming soon.
Nice. Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks so much for your time and sharing your story here. And I'll go ahead and invite everybody back, and we can see if anybody's got any questions and chat for a little bit here. So thanks so much.